Hi, my name is Greg Grubbs. I'm a systems engineer with Cloudera, and I'm here to introduce you to the details of using Cloudera Director on Google Cloud Platform. Let's look at just what we will be learning in this particular video. We will go a little bit into what Cloudera Director is and its use in Google Cloud. We'll show the Director server, which includes a web user interface. We'll get into the client in a very deep drill down, so you'll see the entire config file for a rather full-fledged configuration for Director. And then after we go through bringing the cluster up and seeing how that's done and monitoring its progress both from the command line and the web user interface, I'll have some links to resources so that you can get started with all those things on your own. Cloudera Director is Cloudera's tool for easy provisioning, installation, configuration, and management of clusters on one or multiple cloud platforms. It provides for easy administration of those clusters in a cloud environment, which includes the ability to resize those clusters and use them for transient or permanent workflows. It provides a single pane of glass on multiple clusters throughout different cloud environments and gives you very flexible deployment options, as we'll see in this technical drill down into Cloudera Director. We'll be going over the details of using Director on Google's cloud platform in this video, one of my favorite environments for working in the cloud, and using Director to provision in this very fast and efficient and cost-effective platform is especially enjoyable and I think useful for your organization. Before I start in the drill down, I do want to bring out some of the points that makes the cloud environment and the hybrid environment that our customers are doing so very, very important to Cloudera, and why so much resource and attention is going into this particular aspect of deploying Cloudera's Hadoop distribution within cloud environments. A big part of it, of having the CDH distro in the cloud, is that it's really what I call later in the video the clear Tesla of the Hadoop distributions. It has the most features, the most enterprise features. So while it's very simple and fast to deploy a bare bones Apache Hadoop within the cloud environments, what you end up with is something that does not have the enterprise features that you would expect. No monitoring, no metadata governance, no advanced access control and security features. So this is a reason to bring up a more full distribution, Cloudera CDH, within the cloud environments. In the past, it hasn't been that easy to do, but Cloudera Director makes it just as simple to create a much more complex and rich environment within your cloud platforms than it was before, with the same type of speed and ease of use. I'm not going to show the actual installation of Cloudera Director in this video, but I will show you how you can come to the instructions to install it. So you go to cloudera.com, choose Downloads, choose Cloudera Director, and then download Cloudera Director. Now, what you'll see is that rather than a particular download that you would do to your workstation, since this is on the cloud environment, where you're going to get is instructions for how to install it in whatever type of cloud environment you're on. So let's just go straight to documentation and getting started. We're going to choose getting started on Google Cloud Platform, and then you get a whole set of very excellent detailed instructions for how to get started. If you're new to Google Cloud Platform, then you need to start an account, start a project, which is where you do your work, or you start your instances and so forth in one or more projects. And then if you've ever installed Linux software on any type of machine, at that point, it's a very simple matter of getting the repository definition for CentOS or RHEL, for instance, or Debian or Ubuntu, and then doing a yum install or apt-get install of Cloudera Director. And that's all included here. What I have done for this video is I already have an instance with a root disk with Director installed, and I'm going to get that running, and we'll go and look at what that looks like once it's already running. So what I have done is I have started actually two instances. The first is for Director itself, which I called Director Server, and the second for a MySQL database. This is meant to approximate a production deployment of CDH, and for that reason I have the database that the various service components of Cloudera, or I should say of the Hadoop ecosystem really, require for their metadata. So in a production environment, it's best to have that stored in a database that you control. MySQL or Oracle are two common choices. Postgres, MariaDB, etc. So I'm going to use this as my metadata, and then we're going to use Director. Now I've already taken the internal host name because I'm using proxy. So what I've done is I've started up the instances themselves. I started a proxy on the Director server, which is in the same network that all of my nodes are going to be for my cluster, and from there on I'll just use the cluster. So, or I should say I will just use the proxy. So let's take a look at what that actually means. The internal address of that instance is this Director server dot, and then it has several pieces that indicate the project that I use within Google Cloud, and then .internal. So my proxy rules say if you match this type of framework where it ends in .internal, then try the proxy. Cloudera Director itself runs on port 7189. When you first start, if you haven't changed anything, then you log in as admin. When you're using the server UI, ordinarily you need to start a Cloudera manager. You can also use an existing one if you have one running in the cloud. And what that entails is to start with creating an environment. And an environment is a set of credentials to log into an account on a particular cloud provider. So this might be my Google test environment, for instance, and you will choose the cloud provider. So if it's AWS, obviously you'll need your access key and secret key. If it's Microsoft Azure, you have various credentials. Or in our case, the Google Cloud Platform makes it nice and simple by creating something that we log into with a special account that we've created in accordance with the documentation that I had showed earlier. So in this case, let me go to that really quickly. It's a JSON file with the credentials, and you might choose to change your region. US Central is fine for me. And I'm going to log in as a particular user that I utilize on this project, on this Google Cloud project. So let's do my private key upload here. And I'll give it the passphrase that's on that key. Let me get that right. And then we'll see if we authenticate. Okay, so that worked. We now have an environment Google test that we need to fill in. So we're going to give it the Cloudera manager a name, we create an instance template for it, which is, let's say, you would do different templates for medium, like for instance, this will need no data disks on it. So I'll call it a medium-sized instance with no disks. The machine type, you pick from the Google machine types. As you see, we're just supporting CentOS and RHEL 6 at this point for director. So I'll choose CentOS. And then it's important in my shared account that I put an owner tag so that the admins know that it's my particular instances that are running. And then if you want to specify a particular zone, in this case I'll do Central 1C is what I have used in the past. And then, so what will the prefix of the name for instances that use this template be? So this is meant for CM, so I'm going to just say CM. The networked that I use, remember, is called locked down. And we'll go ahead and use an SSD. I don't need to change other values here. And we have the same username that was used before. This is a user that can sudo without a password on these instances that we're bringing up. The bootstrap script is something that you have an option to do. I'm not going to use one, so we'll just save the changes right here. And then for the license type, you can choose. Cloudera Express is the free version of Cloudera. If you want to try the enterprise license, you can try a 60-day trial of that, and then you choose database server. Now this is where it starts getting more complicated, I would say, using the UI, because you have to get everything kind of right if you're doing something more production oriented. So now we would have to register a new database server and so forth. The very good news here is that in addition to having this very interactive web interface to go through everything, we also have a client mode, which I'm going to show you, and then we'll get back into the interface with our deployment actually running. So I'm showing the directory of my director instance with an SFTP client that goes over secure SSH. In this case, it's the miracle of Emacs, but I'm assuming that most of you will be using some other tool to browse the files. So the thing that I'm interested in bringing up is the client configuration side of my relatively complex cluster setup. So what I have is something called restartable standard, because I want to bring up a cluster whose instances can be paused, can be stopped in the cloud console, and restarted without losing data. And for that, I'm using standard disks. It's a file that is in a config file format that looks a lot like JSON. It's something called HOCON. It is something that, in addition to what JSON provides, can add in comments, and you don't have to quote key names and values across the board. So it's very nice for configuration and maintains hierarchy and repeating groups and things like that. But it's a lot more manageable by humans. So I start with a name for my cluster. This will be the name for my environment and the cluster. And we've got the type of provider, so the provider and the project ID. And then there's authentication, which I have my entire JSON key in the configuration file itself. So I won't be showing that. Let me just kind of scroll past that. And I'll just bring that full screen. So I've got my SSH credentials. I've got the type of instances. This is what we did in the UI under templates. So I've got something called 4-core no data CM. That's no data disks used for the CM instance only. I gave it an instance name prefix, so when the instance is created, it will have this prefix and then a unique identifier following it. The image is CentOS 6. The network name is locked down, and then I choose my types and so forth. And then I can add any kind of tags also within that section. There is a bootstrap script because I was finding there was a given version of the CentOS image that had a repository called SCL that was not actually active and therefore caused problems. So I disable that in the bootstrap script. This is something that happens for all of the instances that use this type, which in our case we're only going to use one of them. Then I've got another one called 4-core no data gateway. So this is used for gateway instances. Then 4-core no data master for master instances. So these are all virtual duplicates of each other, but the only thing that changes of any consequence is the name prefix. And then 4-core 1 terabyte data. So actually this is an incorrect comment. It's got 2 data disks used for worker instances. So any of those types of instances that participate in HDFS. So if they have data node running and they should have local spinning disk attached. And I specify that with some parameters here. Data disk count 2, data disk type standard. It's going to be standard or SSD basically, and the size in gigabytes. And then everything else is, that's the end of our definitions of instance types. In our case, we're going to run several instances for our data nodes that will use this template. And then for a simple configuration, you will not define an external metadata server, but I'm doing that because I want to do a more production type of environment. So let me make sure that we have the correct IP address for the MySQL. It's .0.3. Okay, so that's the same as it was last time I used this script, so we're good there. And then we have the definition of Cloudera Manager. Any configs that we want to put into the service, the type of instance, so it's our 4-core no data CM under the instances category within our script, and the application is Cloudera Manager 5. That's just a tag that I'm putting in. I put enable enterprise trial true. Remember, in the UI, you can choose to insert a license of your own, or go with the free version, or do the enterprise trial. So we're doing the enterprise trial here. And then you can optionally say, should director be installing unlimited strength JCE policy file? That's the high security version of the Java libraries, which is necessary if you're implementing Kerberos and additional security measures within the cluster. And then database templates is a section since we are using external databases, we have to define, and we're going to use our MySQL server that we defined above, and we're going to give it the specific database and username prefixes for each of the services that need one of these databases. So this is something that you can find in the reference template that when you download Director. So don't worry about exactly what this needs to be. I've got Cloudera Manager, I've got Activity Monitor and Reports Manager, Cloudera Navigator, Navigator Metadata Server, all those things. And then you get down into the definition of the cluster, which is where all the details are really. So I'm going to be installing using parcels, the recommended way to install Cloudera CDH. And we're using what's the current the current version of CDH, which is 5.8, and we're actually including some beta things like Kudu and the Impala Kudu that it goes with. Kudu is actually now at 1.0 as of the end of September 2016, but it hasn't been incorporated into a CDH release yet. So it's still to be found in the beta archive. A little bit confusing there, but there you go. And then what we're going to do is define what services we want running on our cluster. And after that, it's just a matter of if we need database templates defined for those services that we want running, then we define them in this section. And then we get into the actual node types of the cluster. So we have gateways. I'm doing one gateway. These are the roles or services that will be running on that gateway machine. We have masters, again, only one of them, and the roles that run on the master. And then workers. So I've got two types of workers. There's this first worker, which has HDFS and Yarn, the node manager, and Impala. So wherever I have a data node running, I want the amazing fast analytic query engine called Impala to be on that, and Spark on Yarn as well on those nodes, and HBase, one HBase region servers there. I have an additional type of worker called worker zookeeper, where the zookeeper server is running. So this is just so that I can start out the cluster running 3 zookeepers, which is a recommended configuration for larger clusters. Not that this is a very large cluster, but it's good practice. So to have 3, maybe 5 zookeepers to keep the ability to always have a quorum for the management of the services that Zookeepers does. And then I've got one additional type which we may use later called Task Runner, where it's just something. The idea is I will put not HDFS on it, but it's just these are just for nodes where we need additional computational power without actually being part of HDFS. So the idea would be to do these only if we need additional processing power and for a short period of time, and then we'll take them down. And that's something the director can handle also. So that's a wild whirlwind tour through the entire configuration file. And now let's see how we actually use it. I'm going to get to a shell. And I'm going to create director shell 1. This is just SSHing to the director instance. And there we see the same files that we've been looking at. What I want to do using the client is it's a command called Cloudera director. And if we just do that, we'll see what types of things we can do. So we can do bootstrap, validate our config file, get a status of something of one of our environments that's running, update a cluster or terminate a cluster. Or this interesting remote server command, tell the server to do those things so that we can actually see it in the GUI. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to say bootstrap remote GCP restartable standard, the config file that we've just been looking at. And then because this is a server thing, we're going to have to add lp.remote.username it's called, and remote password. And I'm just using admin for the default before we actually implement any real security on this cluster. So we'll set that going, and then we'll return as that continues. What I'm going to do is actually talk through this first portion. Cloudera Director Client at this point is initializing its libraries, going through our configuration file, validating it, so checking it for sanity checks, and then it's going to connect to the same server URL that we were on, port 7189, and then it's going to tell it to start working. So we can watch it from this point either at the command line, or we can switch back to our browser and go to Cloudera Director, and let's refresh that. And we see that we have our environment beginning to bootstrap. So let's look at the deployment. And we see two things happening. One is we're bootstrapping Cloudera Manager, and the other part is bootstrapping all the instances for the nodes in the cluster. And we can actually go and see that back in our cloud provider if I refresh that page. And we see we've got a whole load of instances running. And so that you can really relate what you just saw in the config file to what we actually get in the console, we've got these, for instance, the Cloudera Manager is this CM-UUID, and then we've got a gateway UUID, a master. We should have, okay, so we have one worker and two Z workers. These are our ones with Zookeeper added. So we will have 3 data nodes in this small cluster. Small but somewhat production-oriented cluster. And at this point, we can just let that go and return when we're ready to see Cloudera Manager up and running. And the services have waited a couple minutes, and let's log into Cloudera Manager, take a quick look. This is not going to look pretty at first because it's not really ready to go. So Cloudera Manager is running. However, as we'll see, there's no clusters defined. There's no monitoring of any kind of services. There's no hosts even defined. And the reason for that we'll see in our command line. All of this stuff has been installed, but it has yet to deploy agents, get the configurations going, and install the hosts themselves. So that's what's happening now. And again, you can look at that either from the command line or from the UI. So it'll take a while to install the hosts, but we can kind of watch that process as well, because Cloudera Manager now is actually doing this. It's actually got the list of hosts that were brought up by Director and created a cluster definition. It knows what roles need to be on which nodes, and it just goes through the entire process of installing all of those in parallel, as you would do if you were bringing up Cloudera on your own hardware, for instance, or you were following the instructions in Cloudera's documentation for a Path A or a Path B installation. And we'll come back once our cluster is ready to go. And we're going to take another peek as it's a little farther along. This is exactly what you want to see. Because we have the ability to configure the services and put whatever parameters we need in the Director configuration file, the cluster will come up the first time correctly. And it's not something that will require a lot of tweaking. So this is something that you can do as an iterative type of thing as you're developing your config for your organization. And it's one of the real delights of using Cloudera Director, that it takes care not only of the provisioning, but of the very low-level optimizations that are required at the operating system level, as well as the configuration and co-configuration and testing of all the services in this vast Hadoop ecosystem as the cluster is coming up. So you've got Cloudera Director and Manager working for you in this case in a very automated fashion. And what you end up with is not a very stripped down, bare bones type of Hadoop with no monitoring and no security and no metadata lineage. Instead, you've got the Tesla of Hadoop distributions, with Cloudera having all of those things that can be brought up within the cloud in as easy a fashion as one of the quick wizards that you get on the cloud providers themselves. And Google is a delight to work on as well, because it's very, to my mind, it's very intuitive and it's extremely fast. Those instances come up so quickly, so that it's just a delight to use all around. So come back when this is fully running, and we'll talk through some more of Director. And that's it. Once we'll go back to the shell. This is the end of the client script as it ran. It ran through all of its thing. It waited for first run to go from Cloudera Manager. Then it took back over and said, okay, the cluster's ready. And we see we have a nice healthy cluster. I have one configuration issue, which is Java heap size, because I didn't take care of that particular thing in the config. So that's something that I can go back. In fact, let's look at this particular message. It says that basically I'm configured for around 1 gigabyte of heap size, and it would recommend about 4 gigabytes. So if I were to make that change here for the name node and the secondary name node, then that's exactly the same configuration parameter that I would change for this particular configuration within my Cloudera Director configuration. So once I make that change, then my cluster will come up with absolutely no issues. So at this point, we can continue, and that's all I want to show for now. The combination of the Google Cloud Platform with its price performance and its raw network and instance availability performance, and just the simplicity of the interface, it's a real joy to use. And Cloudera Director works great with it. Remember that within Director, you can actually have clusters in multiple cloud environments, because Cloudera is committed to what our customers are telling us is one of the most important aspects of their current and future IT planning, which is that they will have all or a portion of their processing in the cloud environments. And when we have the combination of cloud and on-prem and multiple cloud providers, Director supports that, which is something, again, you're not going to find anywhere else. So what you'll see if you do have multiple clusters, you'll see those clusters and their environments listed here. This is actually could be many clusters, and each one has a different Cloudera manager, possibly in a different cloud environment, and each Cloudera manager might be managing multiple clusters as well. There are various ways that you can specify interactions with your on-premise clusters as well. This is a good topic for another video. So to wrap up, we have seen Cloudera Director on Google Cloud Platform specifically. We saw the server, although only an overview, and went into real depth with the Director and that interesting Bootstrap remote mode, which lets you use the client, however, to also be able to track in the UI. And the last bit that I promised was links to resources. You will find those, including links to starter configurations for the various cloud platforms using Cloudera Director, as well as the documentation help and other resources that you'll find useful in your journey to use Cloudera Director. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to making the next videos.